This morning we're talking about Agile. So, a long time ago, the way games were made was through a methodology called waterfall. So, we would start with ideation, identifying what we want to build. And then, when that process was finished, we would move into a game design phase where we would do a lot of those documents. Then, at the end of that phase, we would pass it on to the team, engineering, art, etc. Implement everything, then move on to testing, where our QA would take a look at the game. And then and only then were we able to see how everything was coming together. The biggest problem with this method is that it would take a lot of time and money and effort to get to that first point where we were able to see whether things were fun and it was coming together and identify the problems of when everything was coming together. So we started thinking about smarter ways of working, and really the whole point was to try to bring that first look way earlier. And instead of going through those giant phases, what if we could bring all of that into one cross functional team of all the needed talents along those journeys, but take a look at it after, let's say, 2 weeks. Okay, so first, we put together a team of cross-functional talent. That could be one or two game designers, one or two artists, one or two engineers, maybe a tester, and a project manager, someone who greases the wheel. We ended up calling that person a scrum master. So that little group of people, cross-functional team, would take a look at the product backlog. So all the great things we want to build in our game, prioritized in return on investment, so value versus cost, and we take the first few items and say, okay, out of those, what do we think we can deliver in 2 weeks' time? And that exercise was called sprint planning. So, sprint planning is the team coming together, looking at the next couple of weeks, and based on their capabilities, agree that at the end of the next 2 weeks, which is called a sprint, we think we can deliver all this fully functional. Obviously, it's small, right? It's not the whole game, right? It's a small little chunk. But the idea is that in 2 weeks, we can actually play it and look at it and then based on that decide what's next. So we've brought that I way earlier. At the end of that journey, we then take a look together as a team, and it's called a sprint review. We take some notes on what we like, what we don't like, what we'd like to change, and some of those notes will go into our backlog, and some of them are going to trump what we thought was going to be next. Now, this goes down in favor of improvements on what we saw in the sprint review. So that's the whole idea. We're also going to do another exercise together where we're not going to talk about the game or the features we've just created. We're going to talk about the process. How did we work together and what can we do better to work more efficiently? That is called the sprint retrospective. And when you've done those two things, you then move on to the next sprint planning, where once again you break those down in little pieces of things that you think you can do in 2 weeks, and so on and so forth. Now, try that with your team. The first question you're going to ask me is like, well, Julian, how do I know how much I can do in 2 weeks? Well, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and basically, it's expected. You're going to bite more than you can chew, or you're going to, not deliver what you expected. It's totally fine. Through that repetition process, you're going to fine tune your process and eventually land at a point where you're going to be able to deliver about 90% of what you expected. And that's what good looks like. There's a whole process of being able to estimate properly, and I will do probably a different video on that later on. Um, but try to implement that process with your team starting today and see if it works. If you're interested in Scrum, which is what this is about, there's other videos on my channel. They're a bit old, but they're still very relevant. So it's called Scrum in Video Games. There's 3 parts. I encourage you to watch them if you're interested in going much deeper into that process and applying that to your team. Leave any comments if you want me to look deeper into anything or any additional information. I'll be happy to help. Take care.